Okay, good evening and welcome to the last session of Prada Frames at the M+. My name is Ikko Yokoyama. I'm the lead curator for design and architecture at the M+. I'm delighted to hosting this together with my co-curator, the Kerry Ryan, luckily invited by Prada to co-host and curate this Prada Frames. And with tonight's the eminent speakers from diverse point of the globe, from Italy, Canada, mainland China, and Hong Kong, which is our home for M+. But before I start, I just quickly go through the house rules. Change the slide, please. Yeah, please have a look. So it's no eating and drinking, and then the no video and the audio recordings are prohibited. And but please, you're happy to take a picture, but just no flash, please. And then also, please sound off your mobile devices. And then also, we take some questions as time allows. So on your seat, you have this little postcard and QR code. So you can scan the QR code and you can send the questions. Then I will receive it via iPad through the event for all the sessions. So you can kind of start posting your questions. And then if it's in Cantonese, we will translate that too. So before going to the theme, so I would like to introduce the Simone Farresin of Formafantasma, who conceived this overarching theme for Prada Frames since last year. So I welcome Simone to tell us a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Ikko, for the introduction. So I just wanted to say that Prada Frames came to exist as a platform to discuss the complex relationship between art, design, architecture, and the environment out of a conversation with Prada team and Mrs. Prada. It started in its first edition in Milan during the furniture fair with a theme on forests and so on the extraction of value from an ecosystem. And this year instead we decided to focus on the other side of the realm in a way of the end of life of things, about waste. But we decided to frame the subject as materials in flux, because if you think about the state of matter, it is in constant transformation. It is never about the definition of a value. That's more of an economic perspective to decide what is waste and what is not, what has value and what has not. In a way, this symposium, it is about looking at the potentiality of matter behind this different paradigm. So I'm very looking forward to discuss further and be part of the panel. But I also would like to add that Prada Frames will also continue in Milan with same attitudes and so transdisciplinary and connecting different knowledges. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Simone. So I will welcome also the other panel fellows, Andrea Trimarchi from Formafantasma and Burtynsky. Please come to the stage. So I will respond while they're seating, a little bit about the responded to the theme material in flux. Maybe some of you might be in a morning session of the C states. So we wanted, go in the afternoon session. It's a little bit different. The title, The Reconceiving Material Circulation, it's so to explore necessary readaptation, recalibration, reappropriation, the use of material and its circulation in order to reduce the human harmful impact on nature. And maybe also again, maybe you have read about it, and in the end of 2020, an article published at the British science journal Nature said 2020 could be the year when human-made mass exceed overall the weight of the biomass. What does it really mean? So this means the beginning of the 20th century, human-made things such as concrete, asphalt, metal, plastic, wood, those our everyday object, occupied only 3% of our planet. But modernity, mostly like a second half of the 20th century, modernity, through rapid industrialization, accelerate the numbers of human-made things. And it's this great speed of the exchange of a human, in expense of the human desire and then the consumption habits to really flip this number very drastically. It is really shocking. So in this modern economy also, we take materials to create more products, and we need what we need, and then to discard them, which we don't want to. And then even unused one goes to the waste. And then transport them as an asset, and then most often the developing countries, and then to process, and then also even to the ocean for the landfill. So in the face of such the consequences, tonight we would like to discuss this topic from very various vantage points, as the diversity of the guests shows, and then also scale, to learn where we are, and then also the visiting examples of the smart resource and space utilization. That's the theme of today. And then I will quickly also introduce the speakers. So in the middle, Simone, the Formafantasma is a studio founded 2009. It is a research-based design studio investigating ecological, historical, political, and the social force shaping the discipline of design today. Their work spans a broad spectrum between the research and the product design and exhibition design and many more. And their works are widely exhibited and represented at the museum collections around the world, including Museum of Modern Art, LAAB in US, Victoria and Albert Museum UK, and Centre Pompidou in France, Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia, and more. And then also on your right end, Edward Burtynsky is a contemporary photographer. 40 years, his work has depicted the global industrial landscape, examining the impact of a human industry on the planet. His work has been included also many museum collections, including Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and Tate Modern in London, for example. And also I would like to shout out his cinematic works, among the others. Anthropocene, the Human Epoch from 2018 will be screened at the Emperor Cinema in April and May, so you can get the ticket on our website. So, all right, so then I will join the seats to have us start the discussion. Okay, thank you. So we have we wish we have plenty of time, but I think our time limited, so maybe we can start with Andrea, Simone, maybe you can share with your project.
Of course. Well, thank you again for the introduction. So me and Andrea, we have a design office, and we established it in 2009, and since then we developed both projects based on commission from commercial clients, but also we have an independent practice that is much more research-based. And often we work with public institutions that are somehow interested in our approach to design. I'm going to talk about a project which by now it's quite aged, because we started the research in 2017 out of a commission from the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne. And the interest of the curators there was to somehow display a new body of work, but somehow related to the Australian context. And for some reason, we thought that an interesting starting point was that part of the main economy of Australia is still the extraction of minerals from the underground. But very quickly, we decided to sort of slightly change focus. We wanted to talk about what is actually happening above the surface of the planet, specifically the recuperation of precious metals and rare earths from electronic waste. We are all aware by now that within electronic products there are many metals that need to be recuperated, but there is a clear design problem here. As we know, because of miniaturizing of electronics, it is extremely difficult to recuperate these metals or to access electronic products that often, at least until not long ago, they were shipped in economically disadvantaged countries from Western countries to be recycled there because, of course, of the lower cost of manual labor. But there is another reason why we thought it was pertinent to focus on this subject. By the end of the century, most probably the majority of resources we will use to build our built environment, when we talk about metals, will come from recycled sources, which is, of course, a great achievement. Nevertheless, there's many things that need to be quickly and carefully scrutinized if we want to make this process develop in the right perspective. And as I said before, the fact that the objects are so difficult to be disassemble and to recuperate minerals and metals, it renders the product extremely polluting, both for the environment and for the people working on it. So our aim was to come up with a series of extremely pragmatic strategies to make the design of electronic products much more efficient. But I would like first to say what an electronic product is, because of course we think about computers, laptops, and so on, but essentially it is any product that has either a battery or an electric cable attached to it. In order to conduct a thorough research on this, we structure it in 3 different phases. One, it is about looking to formal recycling sector, so how electronics are recycled in a more formal way. And there is the informal recycling sector, often employing very rudimentary techniques and often with untrained labor in economically disadvantaged countries. And last but not least, we also wanted to look into governance. So what is happening in terms of legislation to avoid the problem of, for instance, the shipping abroad of electronic goods. The research took almost 1.5 years, also because there was a lot of office work to reach out to all these different practitioners and stakeholders. And I would just quickly mention how the research has been developing. We, of course, reached out to many electronic producers, but only one actually opened their doors to us, which was Fuji Xerox, who hosted us in their recycling plant in Bangkok. And then we reached out to different recyclers in Europe, but establishing their workshops all over the world. We engage in conversation with recyclers dealing with cooling devices, with small electric appliances, but also with related to computers and laptops, because all these different sectors have different problems in recycling these different goods. Of course, we also wanted to engage with NGOs establishing responsible recycling workshops in many regions in Africa and in India, because we also wanted to have a perspective from countries that are, of course, have different needs and realities in the ways they process these products. The last sector, as I mentioned before, was legislation. So we interacted with Interpol, the international police dealing also with environmental crime, with the United Nations University and the European Electronic Recycling Association, which is lobbying for the needs of recyclers. All the outcomes of these conversations and research has been systematically presented on an online platform we created, orstreams.com, to make sure that the knowledge could be available for others to appropriate and to study what we have been collecting. And I will just show very quickly some of the outcomes, a series of films. One that is almost an infographic using electronic products to systematically present how products are recycled today. Another one looking at planned obsolescence and somehow the historical evolution from the electric bulb until contemporary electronic products, on how the strategy of creating obsolescence to improve selling. And last but not least, and most importantly, a 15 minutes visual essay. We have been listing a series of pragmatic strategies on how electronic products could be designed to make these much more repairable and recyclable. Of course, I don't have the time now to explain all the strategies that we've been listing in that animation, but I will just mention a few also because it is interesting to look at what we were advocating for many years ago, because already now, for instance, the European Union is advocating for some of the things we were pushing. Now, of course, we are not aiming to say that we contributed to that sort of culture, but it is interesting to see how quickly we are achieving better regulations. And for instance, now there is a lot of discussion of the introduction of a material passport for goods, a digital passport, to make sure that there are clear information regarding the materials implemented in products. You have to think that daily new polymers are engineered, and sometimes the recyclers, they struggle to know what kind of materials they actually are recycling. And for instance, recyclers need to establish labs internal to their factories to divide properly materials. But of course, this is a challenge for developing countries where less means are available. So to be transparent on the materiality contained in products can achieve a much more efficiency in recycling. But for instance, another thing that it seems extremely simple, but it could make really a change, many electric cables are coated with black rubber, but visual detectors that are used to separate materials, they tend to struggle to recognize black rubber because of its opacity. It is almost recognized as a shadow. Hence, particles of copper contained in shredded cables ends up in the wrong stream of waste and are not recycled. We were also advocating, for instance, for a color coding for different components within electronics. Often when untrained laborers are dealing with these products, they don't have any idea. Some of the components are actually toxic for them and the environment, and they handle things in the wrong way. So even a clear universal color coding would be extremely useful in this sense. Another very simple things we were advocating for was the introduction of a universal screwing system to make things more easily accessible both for user and recyclers. And some of these things are becoming discussed by many people and stakeholders involved in regulations. But I will just stop here because I think we will have time to discuss this further during our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. Yeah, it's really like this topic so our everyday, like how many hours and minutes you're holding your phone and then, laptop and everything touches your, toothbrush, electric toothbrush, everything, it touches our life. So it's a very important topic, and but which was hidden, these consequences, how these things travel and how it's discarded, and which people it touches to their life. So it's a very important topic to continue. And then also the Edwards has been following those trajectory. Also maybe there's some the resource extraction and so forth. So maybe we can hear your presentation first, then we go to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Ikko, for your introduction. And it's interesting, I was speaking to Simone, and Prada Frames was kind of launched out of the idea of the forest and out of the resource of trees. And if in this image that I'm opening up with, in the top left frame, that's me as a 12-year-old. And one of the things that I was introduced to as a young boy, my father came from the Ukraine, but when we came to Canada, he was in love with forests. And I grew up as I remember a 3-year-old walking through and learning to find mushrooms and understanding what a forest is and the complexity of a forest. And then again, with Canada having this vast natural resource of trees and lakes and all of that, I was able to actually fall in love with that place. So for me, camping was a really important thing, just being out there in nature and kind of living off of it. And I think that was an important component to the work that I began to do. So I started photographing the natural landscape, and then what happened is, and this is a photograph I took in 1981, but I was doing natural landscapes, but I came across this one landscape in Pennsylvania. I'd actually taken a wrong turn. And this hill that I was standing on when I took this picture was a view that was fascinating. It was new trees coming through an area in Pennsylvania where the coal mine had moved through. And when I looked, and I was standing on this hill, and when I looked in the whole 360 direction, and then I drove for almost 20 minutes to get there, and nothing was natural anymore. It was all disturbed and coming back, and nature was pushing through that disturbance. And a kind of a light went off in my mind. It was like, by photographing the natural landscape, it had already been seen and recorded by many artists before me, Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. But what hadn't been recorded to any degree is the man-altered landscape, the mind landscape. And from this image, I began to think that I can create a whole life's work by pursuing how because I could see at that time, even at university, I was going to university, I could understand at that time of human growth and that the population curve was intense. And like when I was born, the global population in 1955 was 2.6 or 2.7 million. And in my life, it's now 8 million, so it's literally tripled. The population of the world has tripled. And I understood that there was going to be this incredible drive towards resources, and that I wanted to use this large format camera, that I use a large film camera at that time, that could render detail, very, very fine detail. And I wanted to be able to show these landscapes, so to peer into these worlds that we normally don't ever get to see. And to me, that was an important thing, so I did mining, and I continue to photograph mining even to this day. But then after mining, I started doing quarries, because I was really interested in that, the removal of stone by the block, and how that occurred, and the kind of residual landscapes that occurred there as well. But then, in the mid-'70s, I started thinking about mining in a different way. I started calling this series Urban Mines. And basically, the whole idea of taking metals from industry and from household use and compiling it, sorting it, and compressing it, it's called densifying it, taking all the air out. This metal can then be used in this virtuous cycle. So in the mid-'70s, I started looking at recycling as a subject matter, as a kind of a secondary, more sustainable form of mining, in that we're mining our urban environments. And I created a whole series along that idea of urban mines. I also looked at places where the outcomes weren't as easy, like how do you recycle tires? So I read this story about tires being recycled in a place in California, and they had 35 million tires there. And I photographed this picture there. And 3 months after I took this picture, lightning struck that tire pile, and it burned for over 2 years. The flames were apparently over 2,000 feet high. I then continued the idea of the recycling of bigger things, and I heard that ships were being recycled in Bangladesh, also in India, but I again thought I was starting to work globally, and I was thinking, well, I'm going to go to the places where recycling is happening at a grand scale. So ships being, like oil tankers are by far the largest vessel that we as humans construct. And on these beaches in Bangladesh, they're deconstructing them by hand. It was the most dangerous environment I'd ever photographed in. Also a very unhealthy environment. There are no safety regulations. There's asbestos and the burning of marine paints and all of that. So it's not a very pretty process in the recycling of that. And then I also started looking at simple things. My ideas would just emerge from, like I kept thinking, where do my computers go? Like when I finish with my computer and it's no longer useful, where does it go? And I researched, and it took me to Gyuyu in the Guangdong province, and I ended up there. That was the epicenter of where most of our Western computers were going to be recycled. And this is all boards, just kind of on a valley side, where they just dumped them off the side of the road. But the boards have been deconstructed. They burn the boards and remove all the chips. So, and then they using a hammer, they break all the little chips on the boards into bits, and using tweezers, they would then sort them and put them into the cans. You'll see these little cans beside the seat, little pop cans. They drop the different precious metals into those cans. So it's a very tedious recycling process. And it was interesting that it was being done on, like, this woman was 90 years old, and her front porch has now become a recycling yard for the computers that were coming from the United States and Canada. So it was this kind of globalism that I was also really interested in pursuing, in that nothing really goes away. It just goes somewhere else. And it was very fascinating to, again, just do a research and find out where that my computers went. And then I also, in a lot of my work, began to look at, there's a movie called Manufactured Landscapes, which looked at industry in China, how the West had moved a lot of their industries to China to take advantage of the low tax base, the lower economic or environmental thresholds to work there, but in particular the inexpensive labor force that was there to be able to create the products to go back to America, United States, Canada, and Europe at a very reduced rate, at a very cost-effective way, which in many ways has, prevented inflation from occurring there. If those products were made at union wages in America, the prices of all those, this is a coffee-making plant, would be far higher. So again, it was looking, there's a movie called Manufactured Landscapes where the opening shot is a dolly shot going along that one side of the factory, which was an 8-minute shot that opened up that film. And then I started following where a lot of the recycling started to move to Africa. So this is in Nairobi in Kenya, a plastic, a Dandora landfill, very famous plastics recycling area. And again, looking at how, this is in Accra, again, where a lot of the recycling started moving to the African continent, as well as offshoring. So I followed Globalism and went to this is in Ethiopia, and went to look at Chinese factories being set up and the Ethiopians being trained by Chinese, whereas 20 years earlier, when I was in China, those same factories are being trained by Western engineers and Western business people on how to run those factories. So it's a very rapid transition of technology, and again, I was looking at how to pursue the idea of globalism. So this all culminated in a piece that I did, which is called In the Wake of Progress, which is an amalgamation of about 40 years of my work. That's the earliest work in there. It was I was asked to do it in the public square, and then I've also done it as an inner presentation, 3-screen presentation with sound and video and stills. And I was asked to take over the public square in Toronto at the main intersection. There are 22 digital screens. And I thought, what a better way to take the center of commerce and show not only where the primary sources of where our materials come from, mines and quarries, but also the recycling process and the manufacturing process. So this is a small 2-minute piece showing a bit of the 22-minute presentation In the Wake of Progress. Thank you.
Thank you both. Amazing. It's very scale. It's very impressive, and 22 screens in a city. Yeah, but also, yeah, it's a lot. Both of the presentation, it's touches, and then. But I would like to really start being, the circulation. What you've been witnessing, tracing is this circulation. For example, Ed was the China was in mid-2000. Those are sorting out in tweezers, like picking up the precious metal, and then now they're moving the place to Africa. But how long we are just moving around, maybe before China, because I'm from Japan. Also, Japan was a lot of recycle factories, also in the 70s. And then just each cities become a little bit modernized, then push the next place, push the next place. How long we can continue? But by seeing, also Yola stream, it's also very much tracing to the And then often in the end, it's who is more vulnerable, and then the financially the economically the disadvantaged countries. But how do you see this we keep just move one place to another? It's not really solving problems, and then actually, this China situation you saw in 10 years ago, it's still now just happening to just elsewhere. So how do you see this, the circulation, we just changing a country after another?
I'd respond. I think, actually, I believe that it is kind of running its course in that, I mean, the reason why, in that short period of time, when I started shooting in China, I started researching in the year 2000, and then in 2001 and 2 was my beginning of shooting, and then 2005 I did a book on China. But that's when it was just ramping up, and the labor force was very inexpensive. And about 5 years ago, at one of the grand sessions in China, they had said that they want to export about 75 million manufacturing jobs, and that was going to Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, but also all through Africa as well, to the very receptive countries, Senegal and Ethiopia. And one of the main reasons, well, two main reasons. One is that I think China was starting to feel the environmental impact. And secondly, that the labor force was getting expensive. And it was searching for an inexpensive labor force. And so Bangladesh had more of that, and Vietnam had more of an inexpensive, Indonesia as well, but Africa. But I do think that, but what happened in the last 25 years, which is in many ways an economic miracle, in that over 800 million people came out of poverty in China. And once you come out of poverty, several things happen. People have less children once you get into a middle class, and again, manufacturing gets more expensive. People want a better life. People want to be paid fairly for the work that they're doing, and so. But I do think that the continental Africa, because Africa is 54 countries. All with varying degrees of governance, and some better than others, of course. But after the continental Africa, there really isn't another large, and Southeast Asia, there isn't another large group to exploit. That's it. Because globalism to me is this pursuit of advantageous tax, which is the special economic zones. It also was looking for lax environmental laws and cheap labor. When you put those three things together, it's impossible to compete in a high environmental rules environment with normal labor costs and the taxation base. So I think that's going to end. I think the next generation or so it'll be over.
Yeah, indeed, probably you can totally see also from the photo you shot throughout your career that first of all, one of the biggest challenges is the scale, and also how legislation is important at all levels. So if legislation is not in place, then of course you can go from one country to the other as much as the wage level is very low. And another thing that shows your images is how design in any case is complicit to the destruction. Because of course, as soon as you design objects, they are not disassemblable, or you don't really think about where material come from. The result are, of course, this level of destruction that you can see from your amazing work.
I think in terms of electronics, I think there are improvements that are in place. Since 1998, there was this convention called Basel Convention that started to recognize the problem. It wasn't yet like an enforcement of law. It was just any suggestions to many countries in the world to create legislation regarding the dealing with the shipping abroad of waste. So in this respect, things are improving, and also I think stricter rules are in place now to force also producers to handle better the end of life of things. So I think there are improvements in place. I also have to say that I'm definitely critical with the irresponsible way of handling waste and dumping on others the responsibility of recycling things. But I think we should also recognize that even these balances in the cost of labor does not mean that, for instance, things cannot be recycled properly also in developing countries, because that's also a cliche which should never be put forward. And I think, for instance, something which is incredible when we're doing the research, that many countries that are considering developing, they have fantastic skills in, for instance, separating components, while what we do in Europe is generally shredding everything, even maybe electronics that still works. We shred to recuperate and recycle materials. Instead, I think the future of recycling in respect of electronics is recuperating components that are still, totally functioning, and to avoid the end of life, and so the recuperations of materials, in the later stage. So there's plenty of things that sort of these economic disbalances could also provide possible solutions if there is a willingness of creating sort of the two worlds approach scenario.
Yeah, totally. Like, it's kind of the bottom up, then top down. It's both really needed. If it's now, it's a tipping point. It's already passed. So then, but again, this is who is the recyclers? It's for them. It's still precious asset. They see possibility in it. Indeed. Because we see it's done. It's nothing valuable. But then why they still take this? Because they still can, maybe very toxic way, but they can still kind of find the material. And also maybe they can be also bring a new wisdom to actually, we can stop this kind of moving, shifting around. And then, so that's, I think it's this really the force, both the formal and informal, it will be really needed. So it's kind of more education, or the support to how they can recycle more healthier, or they can see, because it's something when this kind of how we value things, it's really shift very quickly. That's also related to the obsolescence of the object. And then there's the Formafantasma put this website, has amazing assets. It's many video essays you can kind of read and listen about. This is kind of very great tools also to disseminate idea. And then so one way, so maybe because I want to also hear how do you believe, what do you think we can kind of, there's already good, the law enforcement and attitude, but then how you think we can further enforce and then to have a little bit better stream, and then also how we start to see this waste as an asset again, because it's only modernity really changed. Before, back in days, maybe medieval, even earlier times, we didn't really send things around, and we find a way to how to reuse it and so forth. But how do you see us ourselves in the development countries? Instead of course, we can do a lot about buy less and use longer. But is there any wisdom you have maybe witnessed through your journey?
Well, for sure, the rights of repair should be in place. So there's plenty, again, of regulations, but also of bottom-up requests to make sure the things are rendered repairable. So access to repairability, to me, it's definitely key. Education is definitely key. And first and foremost, I think the ban of planned obsolescence, because that's a perversion of dating when a product should expire. And I think it's somehow symbolic that the first product that in the history of humans has been created with obsolescence was the light bulb, with the Phoebus cartel. And I think it is somehow telling that one of the greatest inventions that emancipated humans from darkness, at one point it was decided to create an obsolescence for it. And I think it's somehow symbolic of sort of the perversion of productions and design.
And Edward? Or Andrea?
No, and I mean, just to add something that Simone said, of course, the lifetime guarantee of objects. As soon as you take responsibility of how much an object should last, of course, you also take responsibility on, the future of that object. So, definitely, definitely we need to make much more long-lasting object and producing less. I mean, it's very simple. It's a bit what we said this morning about eating only one time meat per week instead of 10, or having like different behaviors that can save a lot of energy and consumption.
Do you remember, because there was a few years ago, maybe someone also audience knows, because Apple will start to allow the repair things, was a little bit on the news wire a little while ago, and then the instruction, but I didn't really hear what's ended.
No, I think there's plenty of things in place in this moment, and I think you can ask for your objects to be repaired. So I think there is what is interesting to see is that it was a bottom-up request to have that, and that's extremely working. I think there's plenty of things to do still, but it is encouraging to see also how many steps also are happening these days, even if still there's a lot of way to go.
Edward?
Well, I mean, I think I absolutely agree that longevity and planned obsolescence is a real problem in our society. And of course, that's what keeps, the economy running, is that when like in particular these things, I mean, the lifespan of a phone, but to create a phone, it's a wicked problem to recycle this phone. And I think like technology has got us into this problem, and at the same time, it's going to have to find a way to back out of this problem. The most I've seen when I've gone to places, I've seen how they, in AMARC in Arizona near Phoenix, they can recycle jets. They just grind the whole jet up and break it down into its component parts, and then they have all kinds of venturi, winds and magnets and things to separate all the things. I assume that in time, they'll be able to pulverize a phone like this and be able to separate molecularly all the different components to reuse. Because I think, I saw how they did it by hand, and it's not very practical, and it's not going to work.
That's the problem.
So the problem is that we've amalgamated so many materials and so many alloys that, and to say to designers, well, you can only work in pure metals that can be recycled, that would stop, in a way, the progression of the technology that we have. So I think we have to, come at the problem differently and be able to start thinking of this as molecules, and how do we reuse those molecules in the future? Because to separate the copper from the plastics from the it's not going to be viable. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to discuss more, but unfortunately running out of the time, and then also we can also chat. But also for the audience, like as a museum visual culture, so these topics, it's also new, it's not the new. So also you can see some of the corrections, which also in your project, you're looking at the archigram, for example, in the 1960s, already looking at this, how to stop or how to change the behavior of the throwaway architecture, and then also some older products, also really changing behavior of our habits and then the things we use. You can kind of also, maybe hopefully you can connect to that as well. But anyway, thank you so much, three of you. Thank you.
Cool.
And may I ask next the panel speakers on the stage, Charmaine, Marissa, Otto, and Han, please. Thank you. So I just quickly introduce the second panel guest tonight. So we have Marissa Yu, and with funky red trousers today, co-founder and executive director and lead curator of Design Trust. It's a charity organization that supports design research projects in Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area within an international context. She's also the co-founder of the SQ, a multidisciplinary architecture studio that actively integrates culture, art, and community. And their most recent project, Open Forest, is currently on view. This is a waterfront. So maybe you can see from the tellers after the talk. And then also in the middle, so we have Otto and Chun the co-founder and directors of LAAB Architects, the Laboratory of Architecture, dedicated crafts and innovation. Their work includes from retail, restaurants, gallery spaces, but closest here, they have designed two of the restaurants, ADD Plus and Mosu Hong Kong. But today also I have asked particularly speak about one of their research projects, and then this conversation will be led by Charmaine Chang. It's an award-winning journalist who worked in newspapers and magazines in Sydney, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. And today she's the design editor at the South China Morning Post. Thank you. Stage is yours, Charmaine.
Thank you, Ikko. Marissa, Chang, Otto, a great pleasure always to talk to you about things design. If I could turn to you first, Otto and Chang. This story about Hong Kong's last sawmill moved so many people in Hong Kong and elsewhere. If you could tell us a little bit about this sawmill and also show us why it's such an important part of this discussion about material circularity.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you, Ikko. Thanks for having us at the Prada Frames. So as architects, we work with various kinds of materials all the time, but we tend to focus mainly on the physical appearance, the tactile quality, or the performative aspects of the materials. However, our encounter with the cheeky sawmill has brought us new perspective to the social and economic aspects of materials. So Cheeky is a family-run business, started in 1947, and it is the last oldest sawmill in Hong Kong. So during the golden period in the 70s and the 80s, Cheeky worked mostly with hardwood, tropical hardwood from Southeast Asia. However, in the mid-90s, the new global trade agreement on timber has prohibited the export of any raw logs, which has greatly impacted the entire sawmill industry in Hong Kong. And as a way for their business to survive, they have actually turned it to collecting timber from Hong Kong from various sources, including recycling sources, such as recycling the abandoned lampposts from the electricity company. And these are vanderwood from the Wan Chai Pier, which was demolished in 2014 to make way for the Wan Chai and Central bypass. So we had an opportunity to work with this vanderwood and transform them into the tea cafe at Tea Park. So normally, our productions happens mainly in the factories in mainland China. However, for wood waste, it's very difficult to ship the wood waste to the mainland China factories. And therefore, this offers us an opportunity to work on small productions in Hong Kong, along with other designers and artists. And this has also coincided with the maker movement that has been emergent in the last 10 years. So Tea Park is a government infrastructure that turns sludge into electricity. And then there is Y Park for treating wood waste and O Park for treating organic waste. So these are some of the government's initiatives to educate the public about waste transformation. And our design for the tea cafe at the Tea Park also align with the vision of turning waste into values.
係要好好嘅木先可以放喺海度咁多年，俾你嘅船撞埋去。呢啲木係好有用嘅。
環保署將喺灣仔碼頭拆落嚟嗰100件碼頭木全數回收翻嚟。
佢默默服務咗我哋咁多年，騎咗上嚟之後，大家會唔會就想抌咗佢咧？
環保署就揾咗我哋實驗室，將呢批被遺棄咗嘅碼頭木設計成煥然一新嘅藝術品。一嚿碼頭木，歲月海水沖積，我哋好想保留木嘅表情，用透明樹脂膠將佢風化咗佢，用海水藍去做，將被撈咗上嚟嘅碼頭木擠翻落個海。我哋實驗咗3個月，我見到好多瑕疵啦、氣孔啦，有好多裂痕啦。一開始都好在意，但係之後我哋覺得咁唔完美， 有一啲意想唔到嘅美感喺裏邊。
我哋喺呢批馬頭木嘅傢俬上面裝咗啲充電器，再生嘅木俾到再生嘅能源大家咯。
每一件作品裏邊注入 T part 再生命、新生命呢個主題。
呢個世界我哋太容易就去判斷一啲嘢叫廢，一唔能夠滿足到佢嗰個人嘅需要，嗰樣嘢就係廢嘅，嗰個人就係廢嘅。好多嘢都有個可能性喺度嘅喎，點解有瑕疵我哋就要去揞咗佢啫？瑕疵都可以係一種特別嘅地方嚟㗎。當下你覺得廢嘅，轉過另一個角度之後，你揾到新嘅價值都未定咧。
So, similar to the Vantage Pier, which was demolished due to the urban development, Chiki was also facing demolitions a year ago, as it was located at the Northeast New Territories, which will be turning into a future northern metropolis in government's plan. Chiki has been, sorry, next one. So, Chiki has been relocated multiple times in Hong Kong history because of the urban development. And over the years, Master Wong has been talked to different stakeholders, including organizations, media, politicians, hoping that these parties could help lobbying for government to reconsider its demolition plan. He hoped that Chiki could be kept as a living museum so that the people could learn more about the sawmill industry of Hong Kong. So in 2019, we got a funding, community fundings from the Hong Kong Institute of Architects to help raise the social awareness on the factories, to talk about the story of Chiki. We document the spaces and life of Chiki through workshops, through drawings, through architectural models, photographies, videographies, and texts.
Thank you.
No, still going. Still have a few slides, sorry. So, despite the media coverage and visit by many organizations, Chiki cannot stop the demolition plan. So the factory was torn down by government in November last year. So, the story of Chiki gives us some insight about material circulations. It is about social, it's about the economy, it's about the city development. But it's also about people, about memory, and family history. And it all starts from a tree, from a wood. Master Wong often said, the way of wood is to persevere. We hope that the way of our city through growth, urban movement, city growth can also align with the way of wood at some point. Thank you.
I found that so poignant because when we talk about waste, we often think about the tangible, but there's also the intangible. In a way, the family's history, their skills, the business has all been relegated to waste. Can you tell us what's happened to the family, what's happened to the wood, what's happened to the machinery?
Right now, they still keep some small machineries and some small locks, and most of the woods are moved to Mr. Wong's nephew's storage and factories. But, well, you know, the large machines has been dismantled, so it doesn't work anymore. So he has to change a little bit in terms of the business, in terms of their mindset.
Otto, at the end of one of your videos, you asked whether there could be a type of development that allows for or accommodates people, wood, art. What is your answer to that?
So we have been hoping that Chi-Ki can actually be preserved as a living museum. We hope that Master Wong and his family can continue their business and also to continue to educate, to allow the public to learn about the industrial heritage of Hong Kong. So that was our hope. And we actually believe that by keeping Chi-Ki can also add cultural values to the future development in the North Metropolis. And we think that, we strongly believe that if we can keep the Chi-Ki, there is no actual contradiction between urban development and cultural heritage preservations.
You know, when we talk about circulation, we often talk about retaining the value of materials. When you use the old fender wood from the demolished pier and you created new furniture from that wood, in a way you changed the value of that wood. Can you tell us what the reaction was to that and what you expect, what you want to happen to your furniture?
Okay, so it's been interesting when architects usually choose material, we pick new materials. But for this project, we work on the waste. And oftentimes people think that the matter is a waste when it stops functioning for its original purpose to function. So now we are giving it a second life, we are giving it values, and also continue to operate with a new life. So I think that helps us that has given us a new perspective on when we can change the perspective on waste, we can turn it into values.
Yeah, and also as an architect, we always want everything to be perfect. The alignments, design to be perfect. But in this project, we are learning how to embrace the imperfections, how to learn from the imperfections, and how to see beauty from the imperfections. I think this is very important when you see ways in a different perspective.
You're talking about wabi-sabi?
A little bit.
Yeah. So you're saying that looking for perfection also is a kind of a defective kind of thinking?
Yes.
How would you like the story of Chi-Ki Sawmill and Timber to end?
Yeah.
Or don't you want it to end?
Yeah. So yeah, our hope didn't come true, but we still hope that this is not a full stop, but there will be a next chapter for Chi-Ki and also the industrial heritage of Hong Kong.
Thank you. Yes. Marissa, Design Trust, I'm sure, is a trove of moving stories. Perhaps you could take us through some of the projects that speak to this important discussion about material circularity.
Great, thank you so much. Before I begin, thank you, Charmaine and Otto and Hung. It's great to be on this platform with you. Just also wanted to thank Prada. And also M+, congratulations on an extraordinary opening of the museum and realizing the power of conversation collaborations to build a culture of experimentation. And sort of my entry point in today. And thank you again for having me. There's a lot of discussions on the future, but also how we should treasure our past and present, and this nuanced relationship, especially how design studio Formafantasma focuses on the global ambition of sustainability. It's all extremely global and ambitious, and shares so much common practice with our nonprofit. I will share 2 projects today, 2 core pilot projects, similarly with emotion to heritage and material sustainability with LAAB architects, but also rethinking the role of behavioral transformation to allow us to bring incremental changes along the urgencies of what we face. So in 2014, we established this nonprofit called Design Trust as an experimental think tank called Design Trust Future Studio to bring together young designers, mentors, and mentees to participate in the transformation and culture of the city of Hong Kong. Relating to circularity, there's a couple of really interesting projects coming through which also had engendered some mindset change. I'll just move this forward. On a program we did in a 1940s heritage building in Hong Kong where we had some young designers, grantees and mentees, Flo and Christine, start to examine these beautiful heritage tiles of a building and repurpose them in new ways, highlighting, again, imperfection, but also the role of value of the culture of design. As these young designers grew with us through the foundation program, we did face a lot of challenges in Hong Kong in 2020 and predating that, a lot of global conditioning of the pandemic. So we launched this really fascinating program looking at critically homemade to way to connect the community to come together to collaborate, but at the same time question materiality from home as we all were locked down in a very tight city of Hong Kong where density prevails and public space was actually disconnected and material psychology also was heavily disconnected. So what's absolutely brilliant with the brief that we set up was inviting designers to connect again, to craft something within their own environment, 25 cm volume, and to think about how they could contribute back to our community during very difficult times. Flo and Christine created this Hong Kong brick on your left side, and this beautiful brick was taken in 2020 as a reaction to construction waste and stores closing down, crushed and mixed to look at heritage salvation, and currently they are expanding this process utilizing terrazzo casting to create new bricks. At the same time, they're also pursuing this really incredible process called hybridity of craft and innovation. On the right side, tactile light that takes conductive fibers, looking at how old craftsmen in Hong Kong are reinterpreting embroidery to save and reduce waste. Fast forward, their project recently that I curated with my colleagues at Design Trust, we challenged ourselves about innovation and collaboration through a collective mentorship program, looking at how we can craft new objects within our own environment for a particular zodiac reinvigoration object. And what's really fascinating with this project, it was one of our first times we crafted objects that were fully biodegradable. So this beautiful piece that kind of celebrates the cycle of giving and sharing produced this zodiac craft object for the recently opened Hong Kong Palace Museum that's a neighboring cultural institution with their master Chi Wing, and challenged themselves to create a zodiac purely made out of goat's milk. And through this process of fabrication, innovation, testing, the extraordinary object of using casein and protein and milk to produce different ways of using biodegradable materials that led to different types of research in the material as bioplastic. But the property itself then engendered how we actually started to think about the role of shaping and crafting the process of making. So the second project, just to share kind of more globally, I don't know if I have too much time, but a real big passion project in our nonprofit organization, again, stitching about the question of the future, not just the public space, but engendering a process of communication with different stakeholders in mind. In 2017, established this program alongside a question of living in Hong Kong on the micro impacts of in domestic living, and simply the question of how can we create new public realm spaces, micro parks that are unique, that are crafted from within a grassroots community, but also can change policy and also test new ideas. In Hong Kong, we're privileged to have many different types of communities, but also underserved communities. So just to show you some of the activations in the last 5 to 6 years, working alongside many communities in Hong Kong, young designers that are actually also sitting with us in the audience today, participating a participatory process to create new playgrounds, craft with materials, really transform how we understand the role of material in biophilia to transform psychology. We had really great opportunities to reimagine the role of as simple as fighting for this beautiful purple grass that was never specified in Hong Kong, but really look at the relationship with culture of building and testing, where one could have dignified public spaces and humanity as we move forward in Hong Kong in a very dense environment. This project has engendered a lot of conversation about circularity of not just materials, but also social engagement, public context, and also the, in one sense, the radicality of how small initiatives can make bigger change in our community in Hong Kong. So I will just close with this last, most recent park, and invite all of you to come visit. Recently, we just launched this extraordinary small park in Sek Tong Zhou, celebrating the culture of the community, envisioning new materials such as TO stone established by a laboratory in Hong Kong using recycled glass bricks, really pushing hard with government regulations, think tank studios, to ensure we can light up our community after years of challenges and build a sense of optimism through innovating with LED light tubes, and also crafting this real engagement of how design and architecture arts can actually participate in the future public space. So just to end, really exciting to share these projects. Our next one is unfolding soon, not too far from M+ Museum. We have an extraordinary amount of culture and heritage in Hong Kong. And relating it back to a year and a half ago, I did call Otto desperately for advice. And I'm proud to say we asked about how do we use chopping wood and materials to sustain. So what I'm proud to say is these community projects are layered. They challenge expertise, but they also allow us to question our role as designers, architects, curators in participating in public space and engagement. And Hamilton Street Rest Garden is beautiful. It engages with 65-year-old industries in Hong Kong. It will be one of the first few parks to utilize materials from the local community, like the chopping board, to Bengay, which is this amazing 80-year-old copper manufacturer, but at the same time really celebrate the role of engagement and testing and incremental experimentation. And I love what Simone and Formafantasma mentioned about this culture of material digital passport. I hope we can do the same with locality of materials and the craftsmen of Hong Kong. So thank you for inviting me.
Marissa, I followed these parks from the off. From the time it was just a concept, you never really thought it would become something like this. I mean, what you haven't mentioned, I don't think, is that these parks, in refurbishing the spaces, the sitting out spaces, you ensured that they didn't become waste. So I think that's really important. What I wanted to ask also is that there's this concept of, waste being a human invention. that it is a sign of inefficiency. With the designers who come to Design Trust, are they addressing the possibility of designing waste out of the design process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges and discussions about designing for disassembly. There's a lot of examinations on just a simple thread can really transform a conductive yarn instead of just purely a singular function. There's a lot of really interesting research on the multiplication of function that allows it to have more use. So as simple as the park, whether it's a beautiful park for the elderly to engage with, the materials are actually, whether they're reinforced concrete, glass fibers, or teal stone, or engaging the planting system actually to reduce the pressures of social psychology in Hong Kong and color politics. There's so much research into that. And one thing I'm really proud of also is we do have this extraordinary team, also I think earlier at Hong Kong Laboratory grantees looking at, they call it impossible bricks, looking at seashells, materialities that actually can be fully biodegradable and have use beyond its singularity. So yes, it's a really fascinating topic to engage with.
I know we don't have much time, but I wanted to pick up on the casing material. Was it used as a viable alternative to plastic? I mean, is it a viable alternative to eco-unfriendly materials?
That's great. Flo and Christine, actually, what's exciting with their kind of cultural journey with us since 2017 is really testing these notions. So they've recently been working with another extraordinary startup manufacturing company to examine this, but not only just with bioplastics, but pigmentation, pigmentations and pigments and coloration. So, there's many layers of circularity and material innovation going on, but it does take a lot of stakeholders to come together to engage in that conversation.
I love how you picked 2 brick projects, because the metaphor is irresistible, bricks being building blocks. Have they been building blocks for the studios concerned?
Yeah, I mean, with another project also coming out of the studio and also some of the programs, I suppose the role of automation, robotics, and the kind of manufacturing process, whether it's for construction of housing in Hong Kong, there is a lot of civic and cultural design responsibility to engage with that. So I would probably conclude with hoping, yes, new bricks for foundation, but not singularity, but also a community collaboration.
Thank you. I really hope this discussion about circularity doesn't end with a full stop, because that's just too final, isn't it? But thank you. Thank you, Ikko.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Charmaine, LAAB Architects, and Marissa for really emphasizing the social and cultural value of material use and reuse. I'm Shirley Surya, Curator for Design and Architecture at M+, and really delighted to have Chang or Chang from Beijing here with us. So I just wanted to really, just a brief introduction, because I know we are running out of time, but I think it's really key. I think Young-ho is really one of the example of a very key architectural practice in China that really had a very consistent use of a kind of a materiality in your practice. So I just wanted to introduce that Young-ho is a co-founder of Atelier Feichang Jianzu, or FCJZ, based in Beijing. And at a time when China was just allowed to build like private architectural practices in the late 90s, FCJZ had paved the way for an alternative as well as an expanded mode of architectural practice that cut through conceptual art, design, and even literature. So this installation, I think I just wanted to share the first slide. Oh, where is the clicker right now? Where is the clicker? Yes, here. Sorry about this. The first slide, so here you go. Yes, so just even for this installation for Utopia Station in Venice Biennale, it already shows Jung-Ho's many kind of engagement with artistic practice, but also with a kind of emphasis on material use. So what you can see here is basically discarded plastic sheets that are very common wrapping material that is actually used for the roof of this pathway that is meant to rattle when people are actually able to touch the cables that suspend the ceiling. So it's that sort of engagement with material, but also with the question of how architecture could possibly move. And I think one of the means, and one thing about Jung-Ho, he wrote this very important article, I think I still remember. It's called The Necessity of Banality, Plans for a Post-Euphoria Architecture in China, where you actually expressed at that point how in the context of China's frenzied consumption of style and image, form itself can no longer contribute to a kind of critical agenda. And so there was therefore a need for a different kind of objectivity, a kind of Chinese pragmatism that actually counters the consumerist hedonism. So one of the means through which I think Jung-Ho and your practice does this, or achieve this, was really the consistent use or reuse or even new use of ready-made, banal, and traditional materials alongside new structural systems. So over here, what you see is actually Atelier FCJZ's bathroom. I'm going to move to the next slide. It's actually a fuller one. Bathroom in Beijing. So you can see that this bathroom is made of, its enclosed structure is made of these plastic blocks that were actually widely used to pave parking lots in Chinese cities. And you kind of roll up this bubble wrap for kind of privacy. So whether it's in the form of utilizing ready-made materials, upcycling the banal, or even applying low-tech or high-tech construction methods, or even the idea of merging kind of understanding of local craft traditions with the fabric of modern life, I think my opinion about FCJZ is that it had really sought to contribute not only to the environmental cause, but also the contextually urgent philosophical, social, and cultural imperatives. So some of these are really 2 points that I've always thought about your practice. So you always try to marry certain oppositional notions in architecture and even life or society, and also contribute to this development of Chinese culture that is continuous and dynamic. And so this is kind of what I think about your material usage really has all these dimensions. So just to kind of like let Jung-Ho continue on, I'll let you share really 3 materials that Jung-Ho is going to share with us today, beginning with plastic, and then bricks, and then later on ending with timber. So would you mind just to start off with this kind of project that is a development from the bathroom in FCJZ? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shirley, so much. You gave such a beautiful talk. I don't think I need to say much, actually. I kind of enjoyed very much listening to you. The first project is the plastic project, which concerns very much about recyclability of material, as well as the design of a lightweight structure. So the pavement block project Shirley already talked about is something is everywhere in China, and we kind of noticed it's a material that is polyethylene, and it's a very strong, sturdy material, and is 100% recyclable and lightweight, of course. So we made this installation in London at V&A in the Central Garden, and with that material, with the hope that that material one day would make a bigger building than our own toilet. So, and then we took the opportunity at V&A to try it out. So we filled the garden with this material.
And then there's another plastic project.
And now from polyethylene, we went for polycarbonate. Polycarbonate is a plastic that makes CDs. And CDs also is 100% recyclable. And in Shanghai, the city actually collect them from the garbage to about probably less than 30% of these guarded ones. And then we use that material to make a tube and with LED lights, and then designed this pavilion for companies in Shanghai, and with a light show in the evening. so also very light. So the next one. And then next one, we went for a permanent building. Maybe we were a little too ambitious, so the building, after 16 years, is still under construction. So we are still hopeful. The material is fiber reinforced polymer. We went for 3 versions. The first one is hollow fiber reinforced polymer tubes. And then we went for the second version, is the one with wood. Finally, it's just to give it a more durability. We actually used is fiber reinforced polymer tubes, but filled with concrete. It's very low tech, so you can see in the image. And that's a building is still being built. But this year, in 2023, we think it's going to be a complete.
Can I just ask you, like, why do you choose to use these tubes to build this building?
So every time when we're not that knowledgeable actually about new materials, often that we kind of saw the material being used somewhere for something, and then we just wondered, could we use it on the building? That material, you see it also everywhere. It's just for make a tube.
Right. Sorry, I always know the abundance of your story, and I got to bring out the fact that your goal here was really to make a building that is light.
Yeah.
And the impact of lightness actually on the foundation, construction.
And also transportation, shipping of the material. Yeah, so lightness actually is a very good thing for cutting down carbon emission.
Yeah. So I think to me, it's almost like it's not just a matter of material use itself, but together with the structural system, we actually affect the life cycle of the production of architecture itself. Hopefully, it has an impact on the overall cause. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So talking about lightness, this is the extreme version of it. It's also a fiber reinforced polymer. But in this case, from the slide on your right, you can see the material could be so thin that for the thinnest part, it's only 3 millimeters. And then there's another very important idea is that, so you see a typical unit, it's about 1 meter square. It's curvilinear and being repeated to serve as the enclosure of this experimental house. There's a very important point I'd like to make. We think that to recycle material or to push for sustainability, it can't only be a responsibility, but rather there's something that we could be moved because it's beautiful and poetic. So in this case, one of the things we're interested in is exactly this. Because it's so thin, so it's porous, so the material would let light coming out in the evening. I think that's just as important as the lightweight part and the recyclability part.
Yeah. I think even in the daytime, some of these light could come through, but I guess it's more evident in the evening.
Right, there's the house with a garden in the middle, but anyway. So that's the plastic project.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say and emphasize that point is so clear. I think one thing about this discourse about environmental sustainability or waste is often on the level of utilitarianism. I think that what you pointed out is that it needs to elevate, I guess, another cause that is much more on the level of whether it's beauty, whether it's philosophical, like value system of what humanity is and all of that, to really inspire the use of these things in this way, and not just a matter of like cutting materials and resources, right? So I think I just wanted to note that bit that you said. And then now we are moving from plastic to another very key material, which actually addresses whatever the panel before us had talked about, which is about heritage and tradition and history, and how in our use of materials, these kind of aspects can actually come through.
Yes, I like to say that this part is very much a continuation on the topic brought up by LAAB architects. It's about the circulation of a material culture as well as the material, both. And here is, you probably see it in Hong Kong. it's a particular kind of a traditional brick. It's a ceiling brick. And we find that brick, the way it's being used for ceiling, is always fascinating. So in our early days, we tried, next slide please, to make a new ceiling for a seafood restaurant. And then later on, we moved back to use standard bricks. For hope is that it's a very basic material, not only in China, but all over the world. If we could just use it to make maybe, like in this case, big span, just more probably challenging structure, it would have gave this very basic material even a bigger field to be part of the environment. So this is a little pavilion in Shenzhen, in Nantou, and then, however, going from there, we designed a community center, also in Nantou, use bricks. In this case, the bricks are different. So you can see the 3 holes in the middle. And then the point here also is not only to just use it, but to use it innovatively so the brick would have very different expressions. So you see the typical brick, the brick being stand up, so you see the holes. And then there are also different ways of bonds. And then, and this is the context of our community center. Our building will be eventually cleaned up a bit, but at least for now, it fits in that particular environment very harmoniously.
Yeah. I think you mentioned about Nantou being a kind of an urban village in Shenzhen, right? So all these kind of almost buildings built in the 80s that are kind of run down, but this brick actually speaks to that. It's a bit of, like what you said, a bit of harmonizing. So even in the choice of your materials, there's also this sense of like dialogue with the environment.
But also the evolution of the urban environment is not creating a tabula rasa and a new world. So let the 80s and 90s also have a place in this development.
Yeah, a continuity again.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
So I think you mentioned before, this is a key project that I learned from you, but I wanted to hear from you about the nature of bricks that are used in China or Asia versus bricks that are elsewhere that actually inform this project.
We were thinking literally exporting Chinese bricks to Paris for our Maison de la Chine project. But in the end, we realized we didn't have to because bricks are abundantly available in France. Initially, our French client really didn't like the gray color, although that was very important for us. That's the Chinese DNA.
Yeah. But I think, would you share about the nature of the project? Why do you have to assert that identity?
Because the international university city, Cité Universitaire, is really like an architectural expo where each country would design a pavilion, or rather a dormitory, practically speaking, there, and then give it to the city of Paris. So ever since the past 100 years now, from 1920, and all these countries would design and build something there with the characteristics of that country's particular culture in some way. And then, however, also we believe in evolution. So today, we wouldn't make a Chinese house with a big pitch roof, but rather use the material that is very common in China, the gray colored bricks, and also the traditional craft as a way to express the Chinese culture. So you can see the different, the comparison between the old ways of making a cantilever, and then we kind of borrow that to turn it into the way we make our eaves for the Maison de la Chine.
So just moving on to the last material, I know we're all kind of short of time, but this is a very key one. Again, going back to historical, again, to me, I think this whole notion of material usage is almost like inevitably or inextricably linked to how you use it, how you construct with it. And so this aspect of the construction method of a timber framework will be great for you to talk about. How do you derive this kind of a classical method
yes,
today?
This is, so I was thinking, we need more sawmills because, and then we can really use more wood, especially engineered wood, talking about laminated wood. This very well-known painting in China shows a levering structure for the bridge, so makes the bridge a rainbow bridge. And we thought the use of wood today can't be just a replica of the way wood was used before. So we, however, use idea of the levering system to design pergolas on the campus. Next slide, please. So you can see here the cantilevered pergola actually using the same principle as the one for the rainbow bridge. And here actually is the only solid wood project we ever did. And then next slide. And we actually had an opportunity to work on a very old complex. It's 120 years old complex. Initially it was for a Swedish trading company in Chongqing. And then our job was to repair and restore some of the buildings, and then to renovate some of the buildings, and also added 3 little new buildings. So these slides actually, so you see all the 3 types of buildings all in one frame. So we use the double pitch roof as the lowest common denominator. And then we developed 10 different sections, mostly using wood. One is eventually it becomes the one used a different material, steel. Then, however, you will see how we restore some of the roof trusses, like the image on your left. And then on the right, we still use small pieces of material, but now it's laminated timber and made an isometric truss in a way. So, however, supporting exactly the form of the old roof. So here's very important point is that, well, we all know, but I just want to repeat it because it's important. Occupying an old structure is one of the best ways to save energy, cut down pollution, than making any kind of a new building. So anyway, that's what we were doing, of course, our client, and very much supportive of the idea. So this is actually one structure. It doesn't matter. It's okay. Yeah, just go. You can see on the left, the front part is restored, and then you can see in the back, it's a new part. And then this is the same space the other way around. The new part is in front, the old part is in the back. And there's another version of it using the laminated wood.
Yeah. Can you share, apart from the use of laminated wood, like your choice of construction method, and how is that actually enabling a kind of low resource utilization?
It's just small pieces. It's always small pieces. Because starting, I have to spend just 1 minute to tell you my inspiration. which is not Chinese. It is an American architect. His name is Yi Jones. I hope you all know who he is, or who he was. He passed away. He designed a beautiful wood chapel, timber chapel in the woods. So the way he started the design is to use a size of timber that is small enough for one labor to carry it by hand into the woods. So I thought that was not only smart, but also poetic. So how the size of timber would relate to the body. So we did the same thing. So every piece of timber it can be carried by one person.
Right. So it's not just low resource on the use of the material, but also on the labor.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, yeah.
So again, you know, we are about 1 minute up, and thank you, Zhang Laoshi, for this. I wish we could share more about your projects, but I just wanted to ask one question. You know, all these projects seem kind of, you have a very good client. Or were you able to, or were you able to actually, you know, convince them? You know, what is your persuasion, you know, for them to actually prioritize these methods and these sources of material?
Well, in the end, for a project, we did have good clients, but they weren't that good at the beginning. And now, of course, there's no really tricks. There's no magic words. We kind of just repeated the same message over and over and again.
Which is?
It's just why we do it. It's not, unfortunately, often not very convincing. But however, I think we repeated whatever message with a faith that miracle may happen once in a while.
Okay. So yeah, so we end with this little project. I think Zhang also just shared a week ago, and about, so this is kind of an example of that sort of like, you know, little measure of change, but it represents your gesture of trying, I guess, so.
Yes, this is, as you can see, this is actually a lot more recent than some of the building projects. We started to understand recycling process better, and also we think we could let go some of our formal and aesthetic concerns. So this is very straightforward. It's China Academy of Art in Hangzhou. They have quite a collection of wasted chairs, crippled chairs. So I picked within the huge collection, I picked number 34 and 35. Okay. So these two kind of crippled brothers, we thought we could put them back together in such a way that they would support each other. So we called the new chair the partner chair, or we had a few other names, but anyway, so that's the sketch. And it's just very straightforward. Just used two steel channels, and then they're together.
Yeah, I think so. This is like a little video of it being tested that it's usable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So anyway.
So yes, that's kind of like our end to this conversation. But we thought it's just a nice, positive gesture of little measure of change. But with a kind of a very strong conviction, I guess, about how you actually rethink materials and existing objects, you know, for reuse. So, yes.
Yes, yeah.
But yes, thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for hanging on till about 7. We're about 15 minutes past. So I'll let Ikko give our ending.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Zhang Laoshi.
Sure, go this way.
Do you hear me? Thank you, everybody. Sorry we started a little bit late and a little bit overrun, but it's now it's, and then also thank you very much for Prada for this amazing journey, and then also all the speakers and the colleagues has been, yeah, I think we went around the many different places of the world last 2 days. And then as I said in the beginning, who have missed maybe the yesterday's also a fantastic lecture by Jack Herzog, and then also including C states in the morning session was fantastic as well. So you can also revisit the lecture, you know, maybe you want to revisit and to reflect on it. So thank you so much. And then again, you're very welcome, invited to the lounge to further conversation with the speakers and then also among each other. Thank you very much.